Euphoria is getting so much attention across the internet, everywhere. And let's talk about it. Last season was so long ago, I don't really remember what that felt like. But this season, the show is just so much better. I love that we get backstories about the different characters and whatnot. But that's not what we're talking about today, because really, I want to talk about how the show explores sexuality. It's such an interesting and dynamic way, and not just sexuality, but also gender. And it's specifically the fluidity of sexuality and gender. That's really what I want to explore here. You're watching the Kenim O Show, and I'm your host, Kenim O. This video is brought to you by mintedculture.com, where you can check out all of my content. I have several channels across social media: Brand Video Pro, the Kenim O Show, Stream OVG, and Stream OVG Business. But if you head on over to mintedculture.com, you can check out all my content in one place. Also, when you go on the website, you can book a one-on-one consultation or strategy call with me, and I can give you tips, tricks, and strategies in business, filmmaking, media, Web3, NFTs, all of the above. So head on over to mintedculture.com to find out more. Episode 3, we saw the backstory of Cal Jacobs, which is Nate's dad. And we've discovered where his fluidity comes from, his sexuality, right? Because we know in the show, we've seen him hook up with a lot of transgendered people. We've seen him hook up with boys. We've seen him hook up with young people. And the show really explored him. This is by the way, if you don't watch the show, this is a married man, middle-aged. He grew up in the 90s, and this is a married man who, I mean, if you haven't watched it, I don't want to spoil it, but he's obviously has a wife, and we find out in the show in season 1, he's hooking up with these kids, these trans people. I guess they're not kids, they're trans people, but he did hook up with a trans Jules, who we'll talk about in a minute. But he's hooking up with these trans people, he's hooking up with boys. So a lot of people will say, how is this heterosexual presenting man all of a sudden hooking up with boys? He must be in the closet. I think that's kind of the problem in society. You either have to be straight or you have to be gay. There's no thing, people don't see that there's a middle, right? People don't understand that sexuality is a spectrum. And if you look at the Kinsey 6 scale, right? The Kinsey 6 scale shows 0 being completely heterosexual, 3 being completely bisexual, meaning that you're interested in both, and 6 meaning that you're completely homosexual. The idea here is most people in the world skew more to the heterosexual side. Sexuality is fluid. Sexuality is fluid, right? And it's interpersonal. Because there are articles, I've read articles about how people, there'll be a heterosexual person and all of a sudden, boom, they meet someone and now they have this sudden attraction to that person and they're into that person. We watched Sex and the City, they've explored that with the non-binary character that Miranda is dating. She's dating a non-binary character. How does she go from being completely heterosexual all her life, and all of a sudden she meets someone and she moves and then she's dating this person who has female genitalia or female reproductive organs, right? How does this happen? And it really comes down to the idea that sexuality is fluid. And I feel as though we're only now getting sort of an understanding of it. We're only now getting an understanding of how fluid sexuality is. And so a lot of people feel as though the media is jamming this down our throats, especially the people on the far right, people, in countries that don't accept homosexuality or even gender exploration. They feel as though the media is jamming this down our throats. But the truth is, sexuality, the way that it's explored in these shows, is the reality. They're simply showcasing what really happens in real life. It's not jamming it down your throat. It's just reality. And even though some people feel as though, they are completely heterosexual, you have to respect that we as human beings, we're all different. And we wouldn't we wouldn't be human. We wouldn't, what is the point if you can't be who you are, right? Why should people have to conform to societal standards and restrictions when they could just be themselves? So moving on to Cal, if you put him on the spectrum, you know, he's sort of, you know, in the episode, especially in the episode, it showed him sort of always lusting after his best friend who was a guy. Then all of a sudden he starts to date this girl who he's really into. He loves everything about her, you know, doing things that even the most straight man would refuse to do. Like I remember he was performing oral sex on her, and they made sure in the show to show that he liked it. So that we can understand that he really likes women, but at the same time he's really into men. And so in a way, but then at the same time he's also into trans folks. So this is more of a pansexual character that we're exploring, and presented in the most heterosexual presenting masculine white male, right? And so that's not something that you see typically, but it just shows, look, this is who he is. And what's interesting about the show is that he couldn't explore his sexuality as a kid, because, you know, his girlfriend got pregnant, and all of a sudden his life changed and he had to now be a father. So at that young age, when he was just graduated from high school, he could have then gone on to college and explored himself. And I'm sure he still went on to college, but he had a child to raise now. And so that mentality is completely different. And so I say all this to say, when you think about his character, why is he choosing very young boys to, you know, for romance? It's almost like when you think about, he lost out on his childhood, or I won't say his childhood, but being a young adult and being sexual as a young adult. So now it's as though he's seeking that in these trans people or these boys that he's hooking up with now in the show. So I wanted to bring this up. I saw this interesting video at 8 at the Table, and it's about this woman. She's from the Caribbean, and she says she's bisexual. She talks about being bisexual, and let's just watch. She talks about coming out to her family. Let's just watch it.
They were very strict because, you know, the Bible says a woman should not wear a man's garment. So I never wore pants. I always wore hats. I always, you know, the Pentecostal thing is women should dress modest. So I never like let on for my parents to know that was who I was inside. And I know there's actually girls that went to my church that are gay. Like, they're gay, I'm bi, but, you know, they were living in that secret as well. I want to settle down with a man. That's why I'm bisexual. You know, I'm not. Females that identify as gay, they are in relationships and want to settle down with a woman. I prefer to settle with a man. I prefer to have a family with a man. I prefer to have a husband. That's why I'm bisexual. I like women. I love the idea of women. I love, you know, the company of women. But I think with most bisexual females, we love all of that, but we still would want to be with a man. But I don't think we go into it and say, oh, we're going to be 70 this and 30 that.
So here's the thing, right? Here's the thing with what she's saying, because I think she's spreading a little bit of misinformation here. So her claim is that, well, you've seen what she claims. The issue with what she's saying here is that sexuality is fluid, and this is something that is going to throw you off, right? And I learned about this because I was reading about asexuals and how they separate romantic interest and sexual interest. So romantic interest is completely separate from sexual interest. And here's the thing, not too many people understand this. And when you look at asexuals, well, they have zero sexual interest, but at the end of the day, they still have romantic interests, right? So they might not want to have sex or perform any sort of sexual activities, but they still have interests romantically, right? They want to do romantic things. They want to be with, you know, actually you watch videos on asexuals, they'll break it down for you, but they want to go on dates, get married, be together, have that companionship, all of that stuff. They enjoy that. So when it comes down to it, back to my point, sexuality and romantic interest is separate. most people are probably skewing more heterosexual, and most people probably match their sexuality matches with their romantic interest. That's most people. But everybody is not the same, and that's just the truth. So when it comes down to it, when you look at the Kinsey 6 scale, and you look at the scale and the fluidity of sexuality, right? The 0 being completely heterosexual, the 3 being completely bisexual, and the 6 being completely homosexual. And you see that spectrum, right? And a 2 is like a little bit mild interest. I just put all the information here that you see it. So there's interests, right? And most people move 1 or 2 spots in their lives, because sexuality is fluid. But sometimes people can, like I said, some people can take a complete left turn and go from 0 all the way to 6 just for one person. That's possible. But just as romantic interest, just as sexual interest is on a spectrum, so is romantic interest. And again, they're 2 separate things. So when it comes down to it, it is possible for you to be completely bisexual, right? But at the same time, you are heteroromantic, or you're somewhere on the spectrum skewing more to hetero. There's also the possibility that you're completely bisexual, but you're skewing more to homo, or somewhere along that line. So that's where the spectrum is. So when she says most women that are bisexual want romantic, want to actually end up with a man, well, that's not most people. That's misinformation. That's people that are heteroromantic bisexual, or skewing on that side of the spectrum, are going to be closer to that. So for example, a heteroromantic bisexual, you could consider someone that is, their sexuality is a 3, and then their romantic interest is maybe a 1 or a 2. That's someone that's more towards heteroromantic bisexuality. But for what she said in the video, I feel like she's probably maybe like, and there's this whole scale, there's a whole quiz. You could do the quiz and figure out what you are. I'll leave a link to it down below. But I would say, from what she said, I would just assume that she's more maybe like a 2, because she said she likes companionship with women. So she's more like a 2 when it comes to romantic interest. But when it comes down to sexuality, she's probably a 3. Who knows, right? And then there's some people, right, that could be a 6 romantically, so they're completely homoromantic, but when it comes down to their sexuality, they're a 3. I've met someone that was a 4 when it comes to their sexuality, and a 2 when it comes to their romance. So that is a heteroromantic homosexual, which is like pretty much unheard of, and probably a recipe for just not having fruitful relationships or anything. Not to come for that person individually, but I don't know how you work that out. But hey, to each his own. And at the end of the day, when it comes to attraction, when we think about the science of attraction, you can't control who you're attracted to. You can't control who you like. So it's not your fault. But the problem, I think, in society is that people haven't felt open enough to explore their sexuality. People haven't felt open enough to express themselves, especially men. So it's really interesting to see in this show, Euphoria, how this, got super cisgender, heterosexual, well, not terrible, pansexual white man who grew up in the 80s, who grew up in the 90s, turned into a pansexual man, probably, we're assuming, later in life, and is really exploring his pansexuality. And I assume that the woman that he impregnated when he was a teenager is now his wife, right? So he's still very much in a full-blown relationship with a woman, but chooses to have sexual relations with, boys and men. And it's interesting that his sexual encounters, as we've seen, they're never really women. And is that because of the lack? Because he always had a scarcity of access to men when he was younger, and then, or in life, and now all of a sudden he wants to do that overkill because he only spends his time with his wife. Who knows? It's a very interesting dynamic to showcase on a show, And I think it's so important to have these types of conversations so there's more understanding around sexuality and how fluid it is. And really just at the end of the day, it is what it is. Be true to yourself, explore who you are, and the rest will come. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I really thought that was an interesting thing. I just want to have a little side note. I saw this interesting video about prisons. They were talking about they're talking. We know that this is a known factor that a lot of men that go to prisons end up having homosexual relations, right? And on a sexual basis. And maybe I'll put a little clip in here, but why is it based on condition? If this is a heterosexual person, based on condition, the fact that you're in prison and you have zero access to women, some people are locked up for 10, 15 years, some people are locked up for life. You really can't really expect that these people are not going to have sex for the rest of their lives. So based on their condition, they have now decided it's okay to have sexual relations with men. And in this case, or even in the case of female prisons with women, homosexual relations, it just shows how fluid sexuality really is. And it goes all the way, the fluidity can go all the way to being completely sexually active, all the way to being celibate, because there are people that are celibate at the same time. But when it comes down to it, when you look at these prison men in jail and women in jails, and then turn to homosexuality, but when they come out of jail, maybe they change, or maybe they've adapted to enjoy the taste. This is now something that they enjoy and they take on for the rest of their lives. At the end of the day, my point is, we have a saying in Nigeria, "Not condition way make crayfish bend," which means that it's your conditioning that will determine who you are, right? You are a product of your environment, and people will adapt to their environment. And so that is how adaptable sexuality really is, at the end of the day. Anyway, I'm not going to condone anyone sort of like bashing people that go to prison and choose to have those sexual activities. I think, look, at the end of the day, be yourself. If that's what you want to do, hey, do what you want to do. But this is just some perspective to let you understand. Look, not everything is as straightforward as you think it is. Sexuality is certainly not straightforward. It's fluid, it's dynamic, and people move up and down, jump from one end to the other in life. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, all the above. You're watching The Kenim O Show, and see you next time.